There is a country in the heart of Africa where the president's own security detail is largely made up of foreign mercenaries, where a private Russian military company has been accused of controlling entire gold and diamond mines, and where a former emperor once crowned himself on a jeweled throne shaped like an eagle, spending nearly a third of the entire national budget on the ceremony. This is the Central African Republic, one of the richest countries on Earth in natural resources, and one of the poorest in almost everything else. Today we're going to show you how it got this way. Before we continue, if you enjoy this kind of content, give the video a like and subscribe with the bell turned on so you never miss any of the journeys we have planned for you. 1. A country whose modern borders were drawn entirely by a foreign colonial power with almost no regard for the people already living there. The Central African Republic became a French colony in the late 19th century as part of French Equatorial Africa, and like most colonial borders drawn across the continent during that era, its current shape reflects European negotiating lines far more than any natural geographic or ethnic boundary that existed beforehand. French colonial rule in the territory was notoriously brutal, even by the standards of the era, with forced labor systems used to extract rubber and ivory that led to widespread suffering and population decline in some regions during the early 20th century. 2. Independence in 1960, followed almost immediately by decades of coups, one-party rule, and political instability. The Central African Republic gained independence from France in 1960, but stable, functioning democratic governance never really took hold in the decades that followed. The country has experienced multiple coups and attempted coups since independence, along with lengthy periods of one-party or military rule, a pattern of chronic political instability that has made it extremely difficult for any long-term development plan or institution to take root and survive from one government to the next. 3. A president who crowned himself emperor in a ceremony that cost roughly a third of the entire national budget. Jean-Bédel Bokassa, who seized power in a 1966 coup, declared himself Emperor Bokassa III in 1976, modeling his coronation ceremony explicitly on Napoleon's, complete with a jewel-encrusted eagle-shaped golden throne and an ornate crown, all funded largely by the French government, which supported Bokassa's rule for years due to the country's uranium deposits and its strategic value during the Cold War. The ceremony is estimated to have cost tens of millions of dollars, a staggering sum for one of the poorest countries on the continent, and it remains one of the most extravagant and widely mocked displays of personal excess by any 20th century African leader. 4. An emperor accused of horrific violence against his own citizens, including allegations involving schoolchildren. Bokassa's rule grew increasingly brutal and erratic in its final years, and he was later formally accused of ordering the killing of dozens of schoolchildren in 1979 after they protested a mandatory requirement to purchase expensive school uniforms bearing his image, an event that helped trigger the French military intervention that removed him from power later that same year. Bokassa was eventually convicted in absentia, and later, upon his return from exile in person, on charges including murder and cannibalism, some of which he denied, though the broader brutality of his final years in power was extensively documented by multiple independent sources. 5. A country sitting on enormous mineral wealth, especially diamonds, that has done remarkably little to lift its own population out of poverty. The Central African Republic holds significant diamond deposits, along with gold, uranium, and timber resources, yet consistently ranks among the very poorest countries in the world by measures like human development and per capita income. This stark disconnect between resource wealth and widespread poverty is a pattern seen in several African nations, often described by economists as the resource curse, where valuable natural resources end up fueling corruption, armed conflict, and elite enrichment rather than broad-based national development. 6. A civil war that has displaced a significant share of the entire population since 2012. Renewed conflict broke out in 2012 and 2013 when a coalition of mostly Muslim rebel groups known as the Seleka overthrew the government, followed by the rise of mostly Christian and animist self-defense militias known as the anti-Bokassa, plunging the country into a brutal cycle of sectarian violence that killed thousands and displaced hundreds of thousands of people, both within the country and across its borders into neighboring nations, a humanitarian crisis that has never fully resolved in the years since, even as the intensity of fighting has fluctuated considerably from year to year. 7. A United Nations peacekeeping mission that has operated in the country for years without fully stabilizing it. The United Nations has maintained a peacekeeping mission in the Central African Republic since 2014, deploying thousands of international troops and police in an effort to protect civilians and support a fragile peace process. Despite this substantial and long-running international presence, large parts of the country's territory have remained outside effective government control for extended periods, controlled instead by a patchwork of armed rebel groups, each with its own local, territorial, and economic interests, frequently tied to informal taxation of mining, logging, or trade routes passing through their areas. 8. A government that turned to Russian mercenaries for protection after losing confidence in Western and former colonial support. Facing continued rebel threats and diminishing confidence in French military support, the Central African Republic's government formally requested Russian military assistance starting around 2018, leading to the deployment of personnel from the Wagner Group, a private Russian military company with extensive ties to the Russian state, tasked with training government forces and, most critically, protecting the president himself. This relationship marked one of the earliest and most significant examples of Wagner's broader expansion into African security and resource arrangements in subsequent years. 9. A private military force accused of effectively controlling key mining operations in exchange for security services. Multiple investigations by international journalists and human rights organizations have documented extensive Wagner Group involvement, and more recently that of its rebranded successor known as Africa Corps, following Wagner founder Yevgeny Prigozhin's death in 2023, in gold and diamond mining operations across the Central African Republic, with reporting suggesting mercenary forces have secured direct access to mining sites and revenue streams as compensation for their security services to the government, effectively trading protection for a direct stake in the country's natural resource wealth. 10. Serious documented human rights abuses tied to the presence of foreign mercenary forces operating with limited, independent oversight. United Nations investigators and international human rights organizations have documented numerous allegations of abuses committed by Wagner-linked personnel operating in the country, including reports of extrajudicial killings, torture, and violence against civilians in areas where these forces have operated, allegations that both Wagner and the Central African Republic's government have consistently denied, even as evidence continues to accumulate from multiple independent investigative sources over several years. 11. A capital city where a giant portrait honoring foreign mercenaries stands in a public square. In the capital, Banga, a large mural and monument honoring Russian forces, including explicit tributes to Wagner's role in supporting the government, has been erected in a prominent public location, a striking and unusual visual symbol of just how openly the government has embraced this foreign security relationship, a level of public acknowledgement rarely seen in other countries, where similar arrangements have remained deliberately more discreet or officially denied. 12. A population that remains overwhelmingly poor and undereducated despite decades of international aid and intervention. The Central African Republic consistently ranks at or near the very bottom of global human development indices, with a large share of its population lacking access to reliable electricity, clean water, or basic healthcare services, and one of the lowest literacy and school enrollment rates in the world, statistics that have remained persistently dire despite decades of humanitarian aid, peacekeeping deployments, and international development programs. 13. A road network so limited that much of the country remains effectively inaccessible by vehicle for much of the year. The country has one of the least developed road networks of any nation on Earth, with only a small fraction of its roads paved and many rural areas becoming entirely inaccessible by vehicle during the rainy season. This severe lack of basic transportation infrastructure significantly hampers everything from humanitarian aid delivery and medical access to basic economic activity and trade between different regions of the country. 14. A wildlife population, including forest elephants, that has been devastated by decades of poaching linked to armed conflict. The Central African Republic is home to significant portions of the Congo Basin rainforest and once held substantial populations of forest elephants and other wildlife, but ongoing armed conflict has enabled widespread poaching, often carried out by armed groups using ivory sails to fund their operations, contributing to dramatic population declines of forest elephants and other endangered species across the region in recent decades. 15. A capital city, Bangui, sitting directly on a river that also forms an international border. Bangui, the country's capital and largest city, sits on the northern bank of the Ubangi River, which forms part of the border with the Democratic Republic of the Congo, whose own capital region lies just across the water. Despite this geographic proximity, the two countries have followed dramatically different, though similarly troubled, political trajectories over the decades since their respective independence from different colonial powers, France and Belgium. 16. A currency shared with several other African nations, tying its economic fate to policy decisions made well beyond its own borders. The Central African Republic uses the Central African CFA franc, a currency shared among 6 countries in the region and historically pegged to and guaranteed by the French Treasury, an arrangement dating back to the colonial era. This monetary arrangement has long been a subject of significant debate, with critics arguing it continues to grant France disproportionate influence over the economic policy of its former colonies decades after formal independence, while defenders argue it has provided valuable currency stability that some of the alternative options might not. 17. A largely rural population where subsistence agriculture remains the primary way most people survive. The overwhelming majority of the Central African Republic's population lives in rural areas and depends on subsistence farming, growing crops like cassava, maize, and groundnuts primarily for their own household consumption, rather than for wider commercial markets, a pattern that leaves most of the population with extremely limited cash income and correspondingly minimal access to markets, credit, or modern agricultural technology and inputs. 18. A country where several distinct armed rebel factions have, at various points, controlled more territory than the government itself. At the height of the most recent civil conflict, various rebel coalitions and splinter factions controlled a majority of the country's actual land area, with the internationally recognized government in Bangui in effective control of only a fraction of national territory. A situation gradually improved through years of peacekeeping efforts, negotiated settlements, and more recently the government's Russian-backed military campaigns against remaining rebel-held areas, though a lasting, comprehensive peace across the entire country still hasn't been fully achieved. 19. A history of French military intervention that has repeatedly propped up or removed the country's own leaders over the decades. France has intervened militarily in the Central African Republic on multiple occasions since independence, including the operation that removed Emperor Bokassa from power in 1979, and various later deployments aimed at stabilizing the country during different periods of unrest, a pattern of repeated foreign intervention in the internal affairs of a nominally independent nation that has left many Central Africans with deeply mixed feelings about the country's relationship with its former colonial ruler, sentiments that help explain why the government's more recent turn toward Russia found genuine domestic political support in certain quarters. 20. A referendum that extended presidential term limits amid ongoing accusations of a deeply flawed and unfree electoral process. In 2023, a constitutional referendum removed existing presidential term limits, allowing the incumbent president to potentially remain in power well beyond what previous constitutional rules would have permitted, a change that international observers and domestic opposition figures criticized as further consolidating power amid an environment where genuinely free and fair elections, given the extensive security control exercised by government-aligned forces, including foreign mercenaries, remain a serious and largely unresolved concern. 21. A country that, despite everything, holds deep cultural traditions and a rich musical heritage rarely covered internationally. Beyond the conflict and instability that dominates most international coverage of the Central African Republic, the country is home to rich musical and cultural traditions among its more than 80 distinct ethnic groups, including traditional polyphonic singing among certain forest-dwelling communities that anthropologists and musicologists have studied and documented as a significant, if internationally underappreciated, contribution to the broader musical heritage of Central Africa. 22. A nation whose story keeps illustrating again and again just how disconnected natural resource wealth can be from the actual well-being of ordinary citizens. From Bokassa's diamond-funded imperial throne decades ago to today's mercenary-secured mining operations, the Central African Republic's modern history keeps circling back to the same fundamental pattern: extraordinary natural wealth sitting beneath the feet of some of the poorest, least secure people on the entire planet, with foreign powers, whether colonial administrators, private military companies, or international peacekeepers, playing an outsized and ongoing role in determining the country's fate, generation after generation. And so we reach the end of this journey through the Central African Republic, a nation of extraordinary natural wealth and extraordinary hardship, ruled once by a self-declared emperor with a jeweled throne, and today partly secured by foreign mercenaries with a documented stake in its own mines. A story of colonial borders, coups, civil war, and a population still waiting for its country's resources to actually translate into a better life. If you made it this far, you now know the real story behind this country far better than the vast majority of people who never hear its name outside of a passing headline. If you enjoyed this video, leave us a like, subscribe with the bell turned on, and tell us in the comments what surprised you the most about everything you just discovered. See you on the next journey.